The reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
Other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are getting.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast with Don Higgins and Terry Peer, brought to you by Osseo Gear. This is episode 128 on July 31st. Tomorrow's going to be August 1st, Don, and velvet season is quite underway. But I got to tell you, you're in vacation mode with your family down on the beach. I can't wait to see pictures of them white legs out walking up and down the beach.
Well, don't count on seeing any of them pictures, Terry, because I don't think it's going to happen. But yeah, I got home from my consulting tour, or not my consulting, but my seminar tour. And I was only home for 3 days, and my wife and daughters had planned a trip to South Carolina. They'd rented a beach house big enough for all of us to stay in. And so I've been here for a couple days now. I'm going to be here for a few more. But anyway, it's not my idea of a vacation, but they're all happy, so I'm happy.
And all the
time with the whole family and grandkids, and go out to eat every day. So it'll be fun.
In all of these years, I don't know that I've ever seen you in a pair of shorts.
And I don't think it's going to start anytime soon either. my legs would probably blind people if I put on shorts.
Well, good stuff. So tonight, we're going to do things just a little bit different. We're going to spend more time trying to catch up on some questions because obviously Don is remote down on vacation. But before we get to that, we want to talk a little bit about summer scouting and glassing. So I think that's going to be a fun conversation. We are going to take a break and not feature one of Don's bucks because obviously he doesn't have that standing behind him in his trophy room. But we'll pick that up next week. I got some traveling also this week. But we'll pick that up next week. But we're going to spend a little bit more time catching up on a few questions, hopefully get 5 or 6 of those done tonight. So just give everybody a fair warning. I want to start the episode out by telling a pretty cool story about what happened to me on my trip this week, if you don't care.
Yeah, go for it.
So I told everybody a week ago that my wallet got stolen. And over the last week, week and a half, 2 weeks, I've been dealing with some identity theft stuff. They were actually using my driver's license and debit card to go cash checks that they'd stolen from someone else. So they weren't taking my money, but they were using my ID and bank account to write checks to Terry Peer, go through a drive-through, and these bank tellers were handing them cash. So upwards of about $5,000 that these crooks got. It's hard to believe that there's someone out there as pitiful looking at me that they would give money to using my ID, but I guess these tellers didn't tell the difference. So we finally got all that straightened out, and I had to run to Cleveland this week with the president of my company, and we were getting ready to pull into the customer's parking lot on Thursday afternoon around 3 o'clock. And my phone rings, and it's a number from Westlake, Ohio, which I've spent a lot of time in and around Cleveland. So Westlake is a western suburb of Cleveland. So I answer it, and this guy introduces himself as a sergeant for the Westlake Police Department. The day before, they had busted a fraud ring in Cleveland with a bunch of people, and one of the guys that they arrested had my driver's license and my debit card in his pocket. So he told me, he said that he wanted to know information about whether I'd lost it or stolen it. And he was very happy to see that I had a paper trail of upwards of $5,000 that were in a fraud case with my license. But that night we were scheduled to eat dinner with a customer that was 2 miles from that police station. So I actually got to go to the police station that night about 6 o'clock, and they pulled out of the evidence locker my driver's license and gave it back to me. So flying this week is going to be a whole lot easier that I got my driver's license back, but it's just, I don't know what the luck is that they would arrest the guy and he was being detained very close to where I was eating dinner in Northern Ohio this week, but it's pretty crazy.
Well, his luck ran out when he started messing with you.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I'm going to keep tabs of this case because, it's all on public record. So we're going to see what comes down to this. I'm sure this isn't the guy that stole my wallet. They pay the druggies and the slum guys to go break into cars and then just pay them for the IDs. So we'll see if it's the same guy that actually cashed the check. Um, but everybody's been asking, so I thought I'd give you an update. So hopefully now that my driver's license is off the street, I'll be in a little bit better shape, not having to worry about this. I want to take just a couple minutes and pick your brain a little bit. This is peak velvet season, so we've got a bunch of people posting pictures. I know Team Radical, our buddies over there, posted a picture that I shared on the Real World site today of an absolute mega giant out in a soybean field that they were glassing. For the listeners that have the opportunity to drive around and glass for deer, what is kind of some tips and tricks and inside things about how you do it up in open ag country?
Well, I try to be as low profile as I can possibly be. As you can imagine, the last thing I want somebody to see my truck parked along the road was Vortex spotting scope affixed to the window and me looking out it, because you know exactly what they're going to think. And so, keeping a low profile is key. And that's the Quiet Cat bike has been huge. And the other thing I like about that Quiet Cat bike is I've even, once I get to where I want to go, I've even rode it through standing soybeans that are like waist high. If those beans are planted on 30-inch rows and not drilled, well, you can drive right down those 30-inch rows to the back side of the field or about halfway back in the field or whatever, and get in position that way. And anybody driving along, the nearest road doesn't even know you're back there. So keeping a low profile is huge. I try to gain a good vantage point. A lot of people have seen the video of me on top of a grain bin with that Vortex spotting scope. Just any place that I can get up high to get a good vantage point, the more acreage that I can cover, the better off I'm going to be. The more likely it is that I'm going to see bucks, or especially a shooter buck. So that's just a couple things that I do.
Have you ever had somebody stop you along the road when you were glassing from the road and ask what you were doing or give you any problems?
No, because if I see a vehicle coming, I don't care what I'm looking at. Way before he gets to me, or that vehicle gets to me, I'm moving. I'm driving right down the road like I'm just another, farm truck or whatever out there doing his business. And I even go so far as to try to block my face when I meet people. I'll lean over to the side, where the edge of your windshield, has that solid piece. I'll try to hide behind that and everything else so nobody recognizes me. But the other thing is you'll notice that in recent years, especially the past couple seasons, I'm not sharing stuff on Facebook or social media like I once did. There's just too many local people anymore that know how serious I take this, and they know that I'm out there all the time looking for giants. And it's, I gain nothing from that, and they gain everything. If I post a picture of a buck, for example, that I've seen or I'm watching, and somebody else happens to be watching that same buck, or they know that buck, well, they're going to think, well, I better shoot that buck this season, because if I don't, Don's going to get it in the future. Well, that may or may not be the case, but I don't want to bring any more pressure on these specific deer that I'm watching than I have to. So I've just kind of got a new policy where nothing goes on social media and gets shared until that buck is dead, whether I kill it or somebody else kills it or it disappears for a couple of years. Now, I'll share it with close friends. You see the best photos I get, as does Wes and Dwayne Hopkins, and Al Foster, and some of my closest friends, Joe Johnson. I'll share with those guys because I know they've got my best interest at heart at all times. And but other than that, I'm keeping a low profile.
So let's talk a little bit more specifically about this summertime scouting. So let's use the Mel video as a reference, because there was two pieces of footage that people can pull up on YouTube if they want to watch this. One of them you mentioned, we were on top of the grain bin, overlooking a lot of property, not only your property, but also, property in the section. But also when you showed footage of Mel from years prior when he was grazing with the fork time buck out in a bachelor group, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were hidden in corn getting that footage. Is that correct, or were you on top of something?
Yeah, no, I was in the first 2 rows of a cornfield where the corn and beans met, and the deer were coming out into those soybeans in the evening. I just hid inside that corn and had my video camera on a tripod there and sit and waited for them to come out. But that was not on my property. In fact, that was a
Right.
couple miles away from my property.
Right. We've talked about how those bucks would summer way off of your property. So walk us through, is your strategy for that type of glassing to get close enough, because you're trying to get footage of the bucks. That was the intent. You wanted video velvet footage of those deer that summer. Is it basically just like hunting season? You have entrance and exit points, and you're setting up in wind, making sure nothing can get behind you. Walk us through. Is it the same strategy as hunting, or is it different?
Yeah, it's very, very similar. I'm not going in if the conditions are not right for me to remain undetected. The difference is I'm staying back a lot farther from where I expect those deer to be. When I'm hunting, I'm trying to get those bucks in 20 yards of my stand. But when I'm trying to get this velvet footage, I'll start way back. I'll start a quarter mile or more away, sometimes a half a mile away, and watch those bucks for a couple of evenings and see what they're doing, how they're coming out, where they're coming out, and then just slowly work in close enough to get some good footage and then back out and be done with it. I don't keep going back, even if I get good footage and I've got those bucks on a fairly solid pattern. I don't keep going back because sooner or later they are going to bust you.
Yeah.
And I get the footage that I want, and then I let them go for the rest of the summer and don't bother them whatsoever.
Right. So, I guess the reason for me bringing this up is anticipation is probably at its all-time high right now. I can just see a bunch of our listeners have gotten a buck that they might want to target, trying to figure out and put the pieces together of where is this bachelor group going to go? Do I have a shot at hunting them? For us in Kentucky, opening the first week of September, we find that bachelor group, we have a chance to hunt that bachelor group for a couple weeks. So I think that this anticipation and just getting a little froggy, it's one of those opportunities where we can get too aggressive and hurt our chances by trying to get in there and glass too much. So I think if people keep in mind that you're basically hunting starts right now, you can't do something stupid with wind or exit routes or get these deer behind you, or else it's no different than opening weekend. You getting blown.
Right, and I know a lot of these bucks are going to relocate when that bachelor group breaks up. What I've seen here in the farm country of the Midwest is these bachelor groups, about roughly 50%, maybe just a little bit more of the bucks in a particular group are going to move to a totally different area in the fall. The other 50% or so, maybe just a little bit less, they're going to remain right there where they spent the summer, really, really close. So, the last thing you want to do is tip those bucks off to where they need to be looking for danger, because a mature buck remembers. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest reasons that most deer hunters struggle with mature deer is they don't give them enough credit for picking up on our habits,
Sure.
hunters' habits. And you don't want to move in close until it's time to kill them.
So, are you just gauging the situation based on the spot, whether you're wearing camo this time of year, or do you stay far enough back that you can just be in regular clothes and just stay back?
For the most part, I'm not wearing much camo. It's so hot out there that I usually do wear a camo T-shirt and have a camo hat, but other than that, I spend a lot of time in cornfields where I'm just inside the first row of corn where I can peek out into soybeans or into alfalfa, and that corn is hiding me good enough. And I'm not at close range either. I'm
Right.
at least a couple hundred yards away in most cases. So
Sure. So take that, you're using that Quiet Cat, and even if it's a area that's further away from the house, you can load that in the back of the truck, park the truck somewhere, out off the beaten path or at somebody's house or whatever, ride the bike and then get close. You're probably then laying the bike down in tall grass and then slipping up the cornfield. What are you doing? Carrying a backpack with your video camera and your spotting scope and stuff in it and just slipping in the corn?
yeah, I'm taking a backpack with all my gear. Throwing that on my back when I get to where I'm going. It just depends on the situation. Like I've rode that thing through soybeans, like I said, that were waist high. Well, when you get on that bike and you got your hands on the handlebars, I've been in beans so tall that those bean plants were actually hitting my hands on the handlebars. So in that case, I just put the kickstand down and leave the bike standing there. And
Sure.
again, we're not close to the deer. We're a couple hundred yards from them, and it works great. Or there's been times where I've taken the bike and put it in the first row of corn. It just depends on the situation and how tall the beans are and what kind of cover around.
Yeah, I think the decision of whether to drive a bike through beans is going to be how wide the rows are planted,
Yep.
because I think we've both had experiences where we've driven the bike through too thick of stuff and gotten some stuff hung up in the sprocket, and then you're in big trouble. But play that by ear. But I think at this time of year, whether you're driving around in your truck, one of the things that I think we also need to be respectful of is other people's property. Parking in the ditch outside somebody's house, looking back with their field. You're probably not going to make too many friends like that. So I think being respectful of that. And then also, I think the best tip of the night is going to be treat your summer scouting the same as what you would hunting season with these mature bucks.
Yeah, each summer I'm looking at velvet bachelor groups in the same places. I say it, a lot in my master class and seminars and such, that in the summer I'm tying my cameras to the same trees, the same fence post, whatever, year after year after year, because these bachelor groups are staying in the same places. And I can remember 30 years ago, you could go for a drive in farm country and you could see bachelor groups of bucks just you know pretty regular. Well, the deer have adapted. They don't, a lot of times they're not visible from the road like they used to be. And when I do find a bachelor group, the last thing I want to do is tip off another deer hunter that I'm out looking at a bachelor group on a summer evening.
Right.
I've even had my wife drop me off, at the edge of a cornfield or whatever, and walk through standing corn for a half a mile to get back to where I know there's a bachelor group. And a lot of times it really starts with me getting these, the photos with a trail camera of a bachelor group. And okay, my camera's the same spot it's been every year, but this year there's a shooter buck there, or there's a buck he's got a lot of potential. And in the next couple of years, he could be a shooter. And as I'm trying to build history with that buck to put a video together later, I will slip in just enough to get, footage one time and then out. And sometimes very often it doesn't happen the first trip in. A lot of times I've got to make multiple trips in to finally get that buck on video. But the last thing I want to do is tip off another deer hunter that there's a bachelor group somewhere around. Here's Don's truck. He can't be too far. So I'll do whatever it takes to be discreet and keep these bucks secret as much as possible.
The other thing that I've noticed a lot of times is when you're driving around and you do see deer, feeding, say it's back in an inside corner, or, a lot of times you'll look back in the shade where the sun is setting, and there might be some deer back there, whether they're does or bucks. But the interesting thing about it, as long as the vehicles keep moving, they're fine. As
Right.
soon as a vehicle stops, they know something's up. They're gone. And
Right.
I've seen them do that a long ways away from the road. So what's that tell you is a lot of people are doing it.
Yeah, I'm telling you that over the last 30 years, the amount of pressure that a deer will tolerate from traffic on the road has decreased so much that it is very, very difficult today, at least in my area. Now, the other areas may be different, but in my area, it is very difficult to find a shooter buck just by driving back. I don't even hardly do it anymore. In fact, this summer, I've been on one cruise on the back roads in the evening just because that is a terrible way to find a shooter. Now, my definition of a shooter is different from somebody else's. If you're just looking for a 3.5-year-old buck, you may be able to find them. But when you start looking for 6-year-old bucks, it ain't going to happen from a truck very often.
Yeah, and this is one of the exact reasons that giant miscanthus sales have gotten so high over the years, because if you have one of those fields that people are stopping along that road, putting strips of this out along the road to block that view, it could be a game changer if you're trying to protect what's on your place.
That's a great point.
All right. Well, I just hope that helps everybody. I know everybody's getting a little wild and froggy. Hopefully, most of our listeners have a good one. Don and I and Wes have all been a little hush hush about it, but let's just say anticipation for us is just as high as everyone else. We're really, really looking forward to this year. I think all of us kind of sacrificing and staying the course last year has got us even more excited, because we have an opportunity for those decisions to pay off for all of us this year.
Yeah, I'll be shocked if somebody associated with Real World doesn't kill a giant this year.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, why don't we take a quick break and listen to our friends Joe Miles and Osseo Gear on the camo that Don and I have standardized on. Make sure that you're paying attention to Osseo's social media. They're going to have some upcoming sales and promotions going on. So take a look at this.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear. Prepare to be invisible.
All right, Don. Well, as promised, we're going to try to get through at least 5, maybe 6 questions. So why don't we just jump straight into the first one? And hopefully, with you being remote, you're still going to be able to see my screen here. Hopefully this works.
Yep, that works fine. I can see it. This one comes from Daniel King, Canajoharie, New York.
You were just there.
I was just at his place last Saturday. Did a seminar there. He says, "Hi, Don and Terry. Thanks for all that you guys do and the willingness to help other hunters reach their dreams. Don, during your seminar at my house, you were talking about how deer like alfalfa and the nutrition value it provides them. I wanted to ask at the seminar, but didn't get a chance. Why does Real World not sell alfalfa? I'm thinking probably because there is nothing special about an alfalfa mix, but just thought I'd ask. P.S. Just got done listening to your Rainbow podcast. Amish aren't perfect either. We're all just human. Thanks for everything." Well, Daniel, I want to start with that last part, actually, if you don't mind. The Rainbow comments. Last week, I made a comment that I'd never seen a gay Amish person. And I got to thinking after we had got done recording that podcast, later that day, I was thinking, man, I hope I didn't offend anyone when I said that, because I sure didn't mean to. Daniel rightly points out that Amish are just human too. I agree. I've seen it firsthand. I've actually had a couple of young Amish guys do me wrong in the last year or so, but
yep.
I'm not certainly not going to judge every Amish person, because these two guys did some things kind of a little bit dirty. But the thing I admire about the Amish is their family values, their community values, how they work together as a community, but also, how well behaved their children are. And a good example was just a couple of days ago when my wife and I left on this trip. We was in a restaurant. First evening we was gone, and sitting not far from us was this table. younger family, and they had 2 or 3 younger kids. And them kids were the loudest, most obnoxious kids that I've ever seen. I mean, literally, they were just disturbing the entire restaurant, screaming at each other. Their parents were just totally ignoring them. And my wife said to me, she said, you know, I have never seen an Amish kid act anything close to like that. They're the most well-behaved. I said, yeah, you're right. Those kids are most well-behaved of any group of kids you'll ever see. And not to get on, some kind of an Amish rant, if you will, but I understand that all groups have good and bad. I don't want people to judge you and I, Terry, over something that another deer hunter did, or I don't want them to judge you and I over something that another English person did. So we understand that there's good and bad in all cultures and whatever, but there's a lot to respect about the Amish. So I just appreciate. I think everybody took my comments the way I meant them because I didn't hear a single complaint.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that happened because I was worried a little bit that somebody would take that the wrong way. And I certainly meant it full of respect.
I could have edited a little bit, but I think you made it very clear. The point there was how involved the Amish fathers are. And I think that's where the whole thing that you started with was. So I think everybody took it the right way. I could have edited it a couple places out, but it was fun. So let's focus back on the other question about, was it alfalfa?
Yeah. Well, Daniel, the reason that Real World has never came out with an alfalfa or an alfalfa blend, if you will, is because alfalfa is a crop that is going to require a lot more attention to detail than most food plotters are willing to put forth or are able to put forth. A couple of examples is the fertility requirements of alfalfa. You're going to have to stay on your fertility. You're going to have to take regular soil samples. You're going to have to put down a lot of lime and probably other fertilizers as well. But that's one. And then the other is the maintenance of the crop. Alfalfa really needs to be cut and baled about every 28 days. And just mowing it and letting that alfalfa sit on the ground is not a good substitute. It'll work with clover. And the thing about a clover plot is, as that plot thins, as some of those clover plants die, you can come back and frost seed more clover seed each spring, and you can just keep that going forever. Well, you cannot do that with alfalfa. The alfalfa plant, and especially the leaves, they give off a toxin. So they get back in the soil, and they give off a toxin that prevents other alfalfa plants from becoming established. So you go out and you plant your alfalfa plot, whatever you end up with as far as plant population is what you're stuck with in that plot. There's no beefing it up later with a little more seed. That's another huge drawback for the typical food plotter. So, because it's such a high maintenance crop and with high fertility requirements requiring, regular soil samples and applications of lime and fertilizer, we would rather see a food plotter put their efforts elsewhere and have a successful plot than to try to grow alfalfa and have a failure. We just think they're a whole lot better off. And, sure, we could put an alfalfa product out there and make some money, but in the end, if it doesn't do a good job for our customer, it's not a good situation for the customer or for us.
Well, if something fails, it's always the seed's fault. So as bad as everyone wants to get on me for saying I'm not giving you herbicide advice, call a chemical rep, you all have to understand where we come from, and we have to pick and choose our battles. Don and I both use alfalfa as part of our diversity program with our food on our home farms. We both have it. We could sell it, we could make money, but at the end of the day, the majority of the food plotters, it's just too involved. And I think the takeaway of it is there is junk alfalfa seed out there too. It's not a matter of all alfalfas are the same. You still have to do your homework when you're buying it, but you also have to know what you're getting into. And just to say an average food plotter can handle alfalfa, I think is probably even more difficult than corn, which we do have a product. An example of this would be today. We got raked over the coals pretty bad. The guy was respectful and did it on private message on social media. with our soybeans. He about 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, he sent us a message and asked what the concentration rate or how much glyphosate he should mix with his soybeans. So I responded back to make sure that it had Gen 2 soybeans, not, anything else. And so he said they were Gen 2. He had a pigweed problem, which in my area we call them hogweeds. And I said, it, I said, you need to follow the instructions on the label. There's too many different glyphosate concentrations and brand names and everything. We can never tell you. I said, you can pour straight concentrate on a bean plant and you won't kill it, but you're going to waste a lot of money, as expensive as this stuff is. So I said, I said, you just want to mix it hot and follow the instructions. And I warned him, I said, depending on where you're at, you might not kill it. And he raked us. I shared a picture from our friend Brandon Epperson today, driving back to a soybean field with real tall beans in it. And this guy just absolutely sent us a nasty, saying, well, too bad your technical support doesn't tell us how to mix glyphosate properly to kill my pigweeds. I'm like, your problem wasn't your concentration. Your problem was you picked the wrong kind of beans and the wrong kind of chemical program. So people just have to understand. That's a long story to get back to the same point. Alfalfa is kind of along the same lines. If it doesn't work because of operator error, we get blamed for it. So even though we could make money, we still try to make the right decision for what the middle people of the bell curve trying to do this are going to be successful at. Same reason we don't sell a half acre bag of soybeans.
Yep.
So I want to make a quick announcement and give a thank you. Matthews helps us out with the Lester's Feet Foundation, and we got in touch with a lot of new families. Please make sure you're following Lester's Feet on social media to keep those families and get kind of the prayer list from us that we publish. But I want to give a shout out to a guy named Brent Brookshire, who is a listener of the podcast. Off the top of my head, I don't remember where he is from, but he actually submitted Lester's Feet's name for a, let me get it here because I don't want to read it wrong. It was a grant for $5,000 from the America's Farmers Grow Community. So there's a nonprofit foundation that runs the Bear Fund, and they help out nonprofit foundations trying to make a difference in the community. So Brent submitted our name and did a bunch of paperwork, and we got a grant from these folks through the Bear Fund this week. So $5,000 donation came in, and that's going to go directly to a family. But if it wasn't for Brent doing that little bit of paperwork and putting our name in, we would have never gotten that. So I wanted to take a minute and not only thank Brent, but also the America's Farmers Grow Community and also the Bear Fund. So if you go to our social media, you can see a press release for this. Or if you want to learn more about American farmers, go to americanfarmers.com and check out more. There might be another nonprofit in your community that you can submit to get some help for them. So with that, let's move on to the second question.
Okay, this one comes from Tristan Reed from Evart, Michigan. He says, congrats on retirement, Terry, and to both of you on the outstanding outcome of the raffle. My question for Don is, you spoke late winter, early spring about a property you acquired in Ohio. Myself and other listeners alike are wondering what the status is out there. Have you done anything to it yet? Last episode was about planting food plots. I was wondering if you guys spread fertilizer while the plants are going, I think he means growing, like triple 19, or just let them go. Also, my first year using your product, and it is growing like a champ. Cannot wait to see the outcome here shortly. Well, Tristan, in regards to the property in Ohio, that property had a timber lease on it that was that expires at the end of this year. So in other words, the timber company has the right to come in and cut any timber that they want on that property. until the end of this year. And they were scheduled to do it this summer. Rain has held them up. They may be doing it right now. Actually, they was planning to already be doing it by the 1st of June, but I think it's the weather pushed them back, which, that has held us up. Before we bought the property, we did speak with the timber company to see exactly where they plan to harvest timber, what they plan to harvest. And this property has some mature pines on it that were doing absolutely no good for wildlife habitat. I mean, they had canopied over. It was just a carpet of pine needles under it with nothing else. And that's what they were going to harvest. And actually, they were doing us a favor by harvesting that. So the fact that has not happened yet has kind of stalled things out for us. We're still hoping to get some food plots in by fall. In fact, where some of those pines are going to be harvested, some of that area is going to be in a food plot. So that whole property has been on hold for that timber harvest, but we hope to be hunting there this fall and have food plots in place. The other question was about fertilizer, and the fertilizer, I'm a big fan of applying it in most cases right before planting. If it's a granular fertilizer, I like to spread it right ahead of working the ground and work it in a couple inches. But without a soil test, there is absolutely nothing that we can recommend, nor can anybody else on this planet. pH is so critical also. I think it gets overlooked a lot. Everybody's looking for a quick, cheap, generic answer to fertilizer. Can I just spray this on my plants and get a boost? Can I just use triple 15 or triple 12 or whatever and put a couple bags of that down and get a boost? Well, the thing is, if the soil pH is not correct, you can put all you want down and it's going to do very, very little, if any, good whatsoever. In fact, you're wasting your money in the fertilizer. So you've got to start with a soil test. And soil tests are so cheap. We're talking, in most cases, less than $20. So you could save way more than that on your fertilizer. You may not need fertilizer at all. You may just need a little bit of lime. So it goes almost back to what Terry was just saying about herbicides and us not making herbicide recommendations. We can't make fertilizer recommendations either without a soil test. So the first thing you need to do is take a soil test.
So one of the tips that I try to tell people is when you send in your soil test, some of these blends, there's no way that you can dial in a specific prescription for fertilizer when you have 12 different varieties in it. But what I can tell you don't ask for a recommendation of corn, because as expensive as nitrogen is for these fall greens, you usually don't need as much nitrogen. Your soil might require nitrogen, but not to the level it would be to grow successful corn or tobacco or something like that. So if you follow the recommendations for either cereal grains or soybeans, you're going to be really close for most of the fall plot products that are sold on the market today. That's the best advice we can give you. I mean, under $20, ask for a recommendation for soybeans. If they don't have that, ask for an application of winter wheat or another cereal grain, and it's going to get you really, really close.
Yep. Great advice.
So, yeah, it's, let's just say that, if there's a big push in this industry to have humongous bulbs and huge plants, and they keep telling you to throw nitrogen on this stuff as much as possible. Just remember, there's a balance between having enough food and then food that the deer won't eat. So make sure that you're making, if you don't have, say you plant a deadly dozen and those plants aren't turning yellow, like they're starving for something. If that's the case, yeah, you might want to put something on it before rain. But if that plant looks nice and healthy, I'm riding it. I'm not touching it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you eat your nitrogen levels too high, it raises the nitrate levels in the plant and makes them less palatable. So there's just no substitute for a soil test.
Yep. As expensive as it's got, that's like saying I'm going to go to the gas station in front of the diesel fuel pump and I'm just going to hold the diesel pump nozzle about 4 feet from the side of the truck and hope some of it gets in the tank at $5.50 a gallon. That's the equivalent of throwing fertilizer on a plot without a soil test. So
Good analogy.
Hey, Spinks from Quiet Cat here in our virtual showroom space where you can connect with a product expert and learn all about our bikes, our accessories, and what makes Quiet Cat the leader in off-road electric bikes. Schedule a live session today by clicking in the link below or going to quietcat.com/meet.
So this one is an anonymous, submitted in a letter by an Amish listener from Apple Creek, Ohio. And it says, and you probably know why it's anonymous when I get done reading it. But this submission says, "Hello, Don and Terry. Love the podcast and thanks for everything you do. My question is on supplemental feeding. Is it possible with a diverse food plot system to create equal nutrition for the deer herd? P.S. Is it a good sign if you have a 5-year-old buck and a 6-year-old buck showing their testicles daily?" LOL. I have no idea what that's a sign of. That's a sign that your bucks have probably got a rainbow flag taped to their antlers.
No, that's not the king buck. The king buck would never expose himself. That means one's bigger on his property.
Yeah, that's the theory anyway. So if that's what you got, then you got a bigger one around there somewhere. Back to the main question: Will a good food plot program do more good than supplemental feeding? Well, my answer is yes and no. You can provide a lot of nutrients, probably most, if not all, the nutrients from a good food plot program. However, I like to have a supplemental feed out there as well, just as kind of a backup or an additional food source. But my home state of Illinois, I've done very well where you cannot supplemental feed. My deer have never seen supplemental feed. So, but I live in some of the richest soils on the planet. And in a typical fall, I will have about 18 to 20 different plant species in my plots. And 12 of those come from Deadly Dozen. Then we got soybeans and corn and clover, and it just goes on and on. But, a deer has the ability to balance his diet. Anybody that was at one of my seminars, a couple of weeks ago, heard me talk about it. And every plant has a different nutrient makeup. So one plant may be high in, say, I don't know, calcium, and another one's high in, vitamin B. And, a deer will crave what he needs to balance his diet. A lot of us have drove by a pasture where someone's had horses or cattle, and we've seen where those horses or cows have eaten the bark off all the trees in the pasture. Well, that's because those animals are lacking a certain nutrient, and they're trying to find that nutrient anywhere they can. And that's why they're eating the bark off the trees. An animal craves the nutrient that it lacks. And if you've got a plant growing on your property that's high in that nutrient that a deer lacks, he's able to detect that. He craves it naturally, and he will consume it to the degree that he needs it for, his health. Diversity is huge. So if you can provide a good food plot program, with 15, 20 different plant species, as well as the natural browse and everything else that's there. And, you can add to that with mass trees, apples, pears, chestnuts, persimmons, whatever. You can have very healthy deer without supplemental feeding. It's just my personal opinion and preference that if you can legally supplemental feed as well, I would add that to the mix.
I guess the only other comment that I would have is, for best results, do as much as you can, as much throughout the 12 months of the year as you can. Even in some states where you can't do it during hunting season, some states you can, some states you can't do it at all. But I think the more that you can do it year round and the more different varieties that you can have in there, the better you're going to do.
Mm-hmm. It's like a person working out, to be healthy or to get in good physical shape. They might say, well, instead of working out 6 days a week, can I just work out 4 days a week? Well, yeah, 4 days is better than none, but 4 days is not better than 6. food plots are great, but food plots with supplemental feed as well are even better.
And just for the record, I got to the point I look like I do today because of a lot of hard work and dedication of not working out.
Yeah, the older I get, the less I like to walk.
All right. All right. Next question. We're going to get through these tonight.
All right. This one comes from Nathaniel Bates from Eubank, Kentucky. He says, Dear Don and Terry, I greatly appreciate the podcast and the valuable information you present. I am a new follower of your podcast, and I will be hunting differently because of what I heard. My question is for both of you. The Bible specifically states in Matthew 5:38-44 that we are to love our enemies and do good to them. Jesus spoke these words, and the apostles later taught the same concept. How do you reconcile this teaching with carrying a gun to church to use in the event of a person attempting to shoot up your church? Also, I'd like to extend an invitation for you both to stop by someday if you are traveling through. We'd be glad to give you a meal and bed. I'm personally a Mennonite, and so maybe my wife's cooking won't be as good as Amish cooking.
I doubt that.
Feel free to attend our church if you have an opportunity. Well, Nathaniel, this is one of the most unique questions I think we've ever had submitted. And I took the time to not only read those scriptures that you referenced, but to also do a little research and read some teachings on those scriptures from various pastors. And I think that the consensus from the teachings that I listened to and read are that you've probably taken this scripture a little bit out of context. The studies that I read and listened to basically was talking not about physical, abuse or physical attacks or something like that. It was more talking about someone slanders your name. You don't retaliate. You just leave it in God's hands. And I know that there's a lot of different religions, some of which are very passive, some of which are not at all passive, but very aggressive. And for those that are passive, and I know that the Mennonite and Amish, I don't know if you call them religions or what, but denominations, I'll call them, are more on the passive side. So, my question, and I say this with all due respect, is if you're part of one of those more passive teachings, if a shooter came into your church, would you just sit there? If he started shooting people, would you just sit there in your seat, not get up, not run out the door, just sit there and turn the other cheek and let him shoot everybody, just walk up and down the pew shooting everybody? Because, we can take any view, any teaching to the extreme. And, I don't think that anybody is going to just sit there and let a shooter come in and just start shooting people and not even get up. You're going to try to protect your family. The other thing is, Jesus, he went into the temple, he overturned tables and he took whips and he chased people out. That was just for turning the temple into a trading place. That was not for physical assault or even death, as a gunman coming into your church would be bringing. So to be just brutally honest, I have absolutely no problem whatsoever carrying a gun into church. And if evil shows up, I will look evil right in the eye and I will put a bullet right between them and think nothing about it. And I don't believe for a second that God is going to condemn me for doing so. If you read the Bible, there was wars rage continually. God had, his followers. He basically led them into battle, made ways for them to win battles when the odds were stacked greatly against them. The Bible's open to a lot of interpretations, but I can just tell you that if I have to look evil, that kind of evil in the eye, I have no problem shooting back. Terry, I think you got an opinion because I can see a smile on your face.
I think at 30,000 feet, we both agree. I differ a little bit from you. I think the teachings of Matthew 5, I do believe that there's some level of violence and physicality with that, but I'm not going to go to the point that I'm going to say it was only verbal. Jesus at different points in time was very anti-violence. He healed the ear when they, went to take him right before that he was crucified. But I guess as a bigger picture, I think that there's better things that we can debate amongst ourselves as Christians than something as simple as this. I respect the opinion of someone who wants to take more of a passive approach with church security and protecting themselves and others there. If you're not comfortable with it, by all means, I respect that decision and don't hinder you or think down on you one bit for my mother would probably be in that side. She's not church security, but she doesn't want to carry a gun. She doesn't want to be put in the spot where she would have to defend herself or someone else. But I guess when we really step back from it, if we're I don't think God's going to judge us or think poorly of a decision when we are using all means to protect the flock. Just like a shepherd would be in the Bible. The shepherd would protect the flock of sheep out grazing. But when we use religion to be offensive, as far as violence, like the Muslims do, or like Malcolm X in some ways did, versus what Martin Luther King stood up for in his teachings. When we use religion as an excuse to be offensive and go do something and draw physical harm on someone, I think that's when it's wrong. I will, in good conscience, sleep every night knowing that somebody comes in our church security team, and the people that have been trained with a written plan and taken the time to and sacrifice their willingness to protect those who are worshiping. I'm okay with that, and I will gladly stand up in front of people and try to protect them in that event. I have no problem with the people who are against that or don't believe that that's for them. But again, I fall back a little bit more to the bigger question here, and are you using religion as an excuse to be offensive, or is this just a defensive measurement to protect your loved ones and other fellow Christians? And I have no problem with it. So, like I said, there's all kinds of stuff that we do every day that people could debate. Some verse standing on its own at the Bible, but I think we got bigger things to worry about.
I agree. Well said, Terry. I think we're pretty much on the same page, and no sense beating this horse to death.
All right. Let's look at question number 5.
Okay, this one comes from Drew Perkins from Belleville, Ontario. It says, "Hi, Don and Terry. First off, thank you both for providing such a laid-back but incredibly informative podcast for us whitetail-obsessed hunters to extract and implement an ever-evolving knowledge base. Me and a small group of 6 of my family and friends have just over 2,000 acres of farms, 520 of which we lease. With me being the only one that has enough passion and time to make these farms as hospitable for mature bucks as possible, how would you gentlemen suggest I prioritize setting up these farms with regards to food plots, trail cameras, stand placement, etc.? I feel like many of the practices I implement year after year have become more so based on familiarity and convenience rather than evolving and changing each year based on the knowledge of deer movement. We see both from time to time in the woods and from trail camera photos. I should mention that we have permission to do quite a lot with regards to planting food and enhancing bedding cover on most, if not all, these farms. I hope that my question wasn't so wordy that it's difficult to break down. Thank you both again. God bless, Drew Perkins." Well, it just so happens that when I was in Canton, New York, doing my seminar there a week or so ago, I had an opportunity to meet Drew in person. And he brought up this question, which I had read his submission. He just submitted it a day or two before that seminar. And his situation goes a little deeper than you would probably gather just from reading this or just from listening to me read it just now. His situation is such is that he's got, 5 or 6 other guys that are hunting these properties, but he is absolutely the only one doing anything. He's the only one working on food plots. He's the only one, doing the stand work, cutting, shooting lanes, and whatever. Everybody else has got something else to do when it's time to do this work, except they drop it on Drew. They drop it on Drew. Then when it's time to go hunting, well, guess what? Everybody shows up. And Drew's question really, or his situation really is, should he continue to do this, being miserable? I mean, he's absolutely miserable doing all the work while everybody else shows up. And when they show up, they're actually decreasing his odds for success. So it's a situation that I think a lot of other people are probably in. They probably got a buddy or two that's in on a lease with them or something, and you got 1 or 2 guys doing all the work and everybody else showing up during hunting season. And that's the reason I picked this question, because I think it's a situation that probably more listeners than just Drew deal with. And Drew threw out that, is he being selfish for feeling the way he does, resenting the fact that he's doing all the work and everybody else is getting to hunt these farms, and how should he address it? Well, I turned it around in our conversation and I said, Drew, the people that are being selfish are the people that refuse to come help you do this work, but yet they want to reap the same rewards that you reap. They are the ones being selfish. You're not being selfish. What you need to do is, I would just go through your group and some of these are family members, so you can't just like boot them off, never talk to them again. It's like, and I wouldn't encourage that anyway, but what I told Drew was what he needs to do is he needs to divide these properties. He's got 2,000 acres, with 6 people, he's got over 300 acres per person. I said, give each person a choice of, what 300 acres do you want? And let that 300 acres be theirs. And if no plots get planted on it, no stands get hung on it, that's their issue. That's not yours. And then Drew, just take what's left. Take that piece that's left and make it the very best it can be. Plant your food plots, hang your stands, cut your shooting lanes, do whatever needs to be done. It's to the point where Drew is even the one that's going out and getting permission on these various farms. And when someone else decides they want to go hunt one, Drew has to go with them to make an introduction to the landowner. Hey, this guy's in my group. It's okay if he's here. Well, by the time Drew gets done babysitting, what's left of his life? These guys have absolutely zero respect for him in this situation. And my personal opinion is losing them as hunting partners is not much of a loss if they're not going to chip in and do their share of the work. So, at some point, there's just a hard decision that's got to be made. Are you going to be miserable? And I know Drew's miserable about this. I mean, we talked for probably 30 minutes, and, his wife has advised him on how to handle it as well. And, it's really eating at him when he's discussing it with his wife. He's discussing it with me, a total stranger. Drew, you got to start looking out for yourself at some point. And like I said to Drew, I said, if one of those buddies that you're catering to, if one of them bought a new fishing boat, would you just show up at his house on Saturday morning and say, hey, I'm taking your boat fishing this week? Well, no, you'd have enough respect for him and the fact that he worked and he made the payments on that boat and everything else, that the only way you would fish out of his boat is if you were invited to do so. But when it comes to deer hunting, people think that, you own land, or you've got a lease, or you got permission on this place or whatever. Take me along just because I'm your buddy or just because I'm related to you. Well, at some point, that selfishness it just gets overbearing, and something needs to be done about it. And I can tell you, Drew is to that point that he's losing sleep over the fact that he's got people taking advantage of him. And, you just got to make some tough calls there, Drew.
Get on the same page with the other hunters. Otherwise, you're never going to maximize your opportunity. We've talked about it a lot. I'd rather have 30 acres by myself than 2,000 with 6 others.
Yep.
Out of everybody that we're connected with, that's a deer hunter in this country, for you and I to basically say there's only 2, maybe for me, there's only really 3. You, Wes, and Patrick Simpson are the only guys I would ever share a property with. And I know there's other people that take it as serious as we do, but we just don't know them well enough to trust them. So you got to take that into account. You got to get on the same page. So we're going to shoehorn one more question. This will be question number, I believe, 6, if I'm not mistaken. Let me make sure it wasn't one from last week. I think I did it right.
This one comes from Marvin Beachy from Dundee, Ohio. He says, "Hey, Don and Terry, I'm a faithful listener to your podcast. I love how you say it, how it is, without worrying about what other people think. I also love what you're doing in the name of our Lord. Listening to your podcast, I realize you hold high regards to the Amish people of whom I am a member of. I want you to know that we are humans just like everybody else, and we're not better than other people. We're sinners and have our own problems, even if most of us aren't gay." LOL. Well, you got a sense of humor there too, Marvin. Thank you. My question for the podcast is about supplemental feeding. Up until now, we use corn, and I know that's not the best for the deer. Do you have a recommendation that has drawing power like corn, but is better for the deer and doesn't break the bank? Thanks for all the info. Yeah, Marvin. In fact, we developed a pelleted feed supplement or concentrate a few years ago. It's called Maximizer Feed Concentrate. Those pellets are mixed with grains like corn or roasted soybeans at a rate of 200 pounds per ton, and or 10% of the ration. So those pellets contain every nutrient, micronutrient that a deer would need, every mineral, every vitamin that a deer would need, and it just helps balance the diet, something that just plain shelled corn will not do. The roasted soybeans in the mix will it'll drive up the protein levels and the fat levels in that complete feed and give you a much better feed. It's probably it's definitely a more economical option than buying a complete deer feed.
Especially if you have access to your own grain. That's
Yeah.
where if you're growing your own corn or beans, that's where it could really save you a lot of money.
Yeah. So, I highly recommend it to a lot of my clients. We just ship this stuff by the pallets to local feed mills, and the feed mills will use the pellets as they mix feed for different clients. So, it'll turn your shelled corn into a complete feed ration. You're going to need to add some roasted soybeans to it as well, and give the deer everything they need.
Bottom line is you need to get your minerals and vitamins in there to have a true supplemental feed program, and you got to get your fat and protein up. That's
Right.
your main objectives versus just feeding carbs corn has a little bit of protein in it, but not a whole lot. This is where we go back to the NutriCrave corn and being able to put that out. That's going to be such a big game changer, because with the corn having so much more nutrients in it, it cuts back on your other input costs to get your fat and your protein up, because you're getting so much more out of your corn. So if you're growing corn to pick and shell to feed the deer, we've talked about on this podcast many times, this is going to be a game changer for that, to keep your input costs down. But there's a difference between baiting and supplemental feeding, and I think Marvin gets it.
Right.
But this is a perfect example. Marvin's cracking a little jokes about that, but the humility within the Amish community is also. So we hold a lot of people up and are very proud to be friends with a lot of people outside of Amish. We just know that the Amish support us very, very a lot. There's a lot listening on MTech right now, but we don't get to see them very often, so we don't mind giving them a shout out when we need to. So,
yep.
All right, so you're gonna take them white legs out on the beach and get a tan
I don't
with
see
your
that happening, really.
with your knee-high white socks and Speedo, I'm guessing, is what Robin told me.
Well, my son-in-law told me that my camo Speedo is going to look real nice out on the beach, and I told him with my finely tanned body, Sports Illustrated very well may send a photographer to get pictures. And he says his reply was, "You must be talking about snow camo."
You'll be hunting geese in Canada or something with that. So, well, I hope you enjoy your vacation. I'm gonna, as soon as we get done recording, I'm going over to a friend's house to use his bow press, and just received my new Matthews bow. So I got about a month of shooting that I need to get done with it after getting it dialed in with a little bit of arrow testing. So, but yeah, next week we'll be back. Just so everybody knows, next week's episode will be recorded later Sunday night. Might not upload till Monday morning. Don's going to be traveling back from vacation. I'm going to be traveling back from vacation. So the recording will be a little bit later in the evening Sunday night. So don't get too mad at me when it's not up by 7 or 8 o'clock on Sunday next week. So,
Yep. Hope everyone has a great week. God bless.
take care.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.